It never took much. A dream, a rumor, a dying cow. They said her bread wouldn't rise, that the cat she fed wasn't hers, that she sang to herself in the fields, that she bled too long during childbirth, that her husband died too soon, or maybe not soon enough. They said her shadow moved wrong, that her eyes were too bright, that she walked alone too often or not enough, that she kept herbs in her apron, that she knew things. She knew when the rain would come. She knew when a child would be born wrong. She knew how to soothe fevers with bitter leaves. She knew how to bury a stillborn with a prayer no priest had taught. That was enough. It always was. No trial, not really. No defense. The whisper came first, then the stares, then the silence, then the knock on the door. They took her name before they took her body. Wife became widow, midwife became sorceress, mother became monster. She was stripped before she was touched. Not of clothes, of humanity. By the time they bound her wrists, she had already been undone. No one said her name after that, only witch. Not friend, not neighbor, not daughter, just witch. And now the fire waits in the distance, but it is not the worst part. Not yet. No trial, no warning, just fists on the door. Not a knock, a pounding, a judgment with knuckles, the kind of sound that wakes the dead and silences the living. She rose from the straw mattress, heart already knowing. The cold bit her bare feet. Her hands fumbled for anything, a shawl, a word, a prayer. There was no time for any. They didn't wait. They never waited. The door broke before her voice did. Men with torches, men with rope, men with eyes that wouldn't meet hers. They dragged her from sleep, barefoot, breathless, blind with fear. She didn't scream. Screaming was for people who believed someone would come. Outside, the world had become smaller, tighter, colder. Windows blinked shut, candles snuffed out behind shutters. The town watched through slits of wood and gilt. No one spoke. No one asked why. They already knew, or pretended to. The children stared. Mothers held them close, as if the touch of the accused was contagious. Her dress tore, her lip bled, her hair fell loose. It didn't matter. She was not a woman anymore. She was a lesson, a warning, a name they would not let their daughters say aloud. They took her to the edge of the village, to the place where the ground was packed hard, from too many footsteps, too many confessions, too much fear. The moon did not hide. The stars did not blink. The night bore witness. Still no questions, still no charges. Only the silence of those who knew that once the knock came, there was no going back. And in that silence, she understood. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the unmaking, of the breaking, of the ritual they would call justice. They didn't wear armor. They wore crosses, not soldiers and not judges, not men, not truly, but something else, something colder than law, sharper than steel. Their robes were black, stitched not with thread, but with silence, with centuries of certainty. They smiled as they listed her sins. Sins that didn't need proof, only belief. She had no defense. There was no space for it, no voice loud enough to echo through that kind of faith. They said her cow had died. They said a baby had cried all night. They said a man had dreamed of her, and then of fire. That was enough. They asked her if she danced beneath the moon, if she owned a black cat, if she bled too long, if she knew herbs too well, if she had ever spoken to the wind. She had. Of course she had. She had been alive. They nodded. They wrote. Ink bled across the page like blood through cloth. A record. A truth made real because they said it was. Their smiles never cracked. Not even when they asked how many demons had kissed her. Not even when she cried. She looked for kindness, found none. Looked for mercy, found only parchment and the rustle of robes that moved like wings. Not angels, but carrion birds. The cross around their necks gleamed in the torchlight. Bright, clean, unburned. She wanted to scream, but the scream would have become another mark in their ledger. So she was quiet. And they smiled again, because silence too was a kind of confession. No windows, just damp, just iron, just waiting. They called it holding, but it held nothing, only pain, waiting to bloom. The door shut like a verdict. Not loud, just final. Sound swallowed by stone, by centuries. The walls were wet with old screams, not echoes, stains. She sat where others had sat, on straw that no longer smelled like life, among chains that remembered wrists and rings that had tasted ankles. Time didn't pass here. It pooled. A single torch flickered on the wall, too far to warm, close enough to watch. No one came, not yet. That was part of it. The waiting, the knowing. She tried to sleep, but the stone was cold, and her thoughts were colder. What did they want? She had no witch's mark, no lover in the forest, no pact signed in blood, only memories of herbs and lullabies, of bread baked right, of moonlight on the well. But they wouldn't care. She whispered a prayer, not to God. He had been silent too long. To the earth, to her mother, to something older than the robes and the books and the fire, something that might remember what fairness was. The chains rattled once, without cause, as if the room itself had heard her. As if it sighed, she curled tighter, not from fear, but to keep herself in one piece. Down here, you did not scream. You did not weep. You waited until your name was forgotten, until your bones matched the chill, until the door opened again. And then, only pain, bound at wrist, bound at ankle. They called it mercy. A prayer whispered, a rope tightened, and she was lifted like a sack of wheat. Not a woman, not a soul, just weight. The river waited, still, black, complicit. If she floated, she was guilty. If she sank, she was innocent and drowned. They called it justice, but the water only listened. She thrashed once, not from hope, but from air leaving her chest in panic. They watched. Some turned away, most didn't. Children held their mothers' skirts. Priests held their crosses. Men held their laughter behind solemn eyes. The splash was brief, no scream. The gag saw to that. For a moment, she vanished beneath the skin of the river. The surface rippled, then settled, then nothing, and then her face returned, half above water, eyes open. She floated. The whispers began. She's cursed. She made a pact. She rides the air like witches do. But it was the air inside her, trapped in terrified lungs, that held her up. Not magic, not sin, just breath. They didn't wait. Hooks dragged her back. Bruised, blue, alive enough to burn. She was a witch now, because the water had lied. That night, the village slept. Bells rang for the soul they claimed to save. Bread was broken, wine poured, the firewood stacked high and dry, but in the river, bubbles still rose. Not from lungs, from memory. The current carried silence downstream, as if the truth was too heavy to stay. And the next morning, another rope was knotted, another girl was missing, and the water, it waited, still black, complicit. They didn't scream. Not yet. They saved that for later. First, they prepared. Rope, wood beam, stone floor. A priest in the corner, pretending not to watch. She was brought in barefoot, blindfolded, her wrists tied behind her like folded wings. She shook, but not from cold. They hoisted her by the arms. Slow, deliberate, like raising a bell. Every tendon pulled taut. Every breath a question. Then they let her drop. Not to the floor, not far, just enough. Enough to tear, enough to break. Shoulders shattered like glass and cloth. The sound wasn't loud, it was wet. She didn't scream. Not yet. Only a grunt. Deep. Animal. The kind that lives in the gut and never leaves. And then, they did it again. A question was asked. Not for answers. Just to say they did. She didn't speak. Only sobbed through clenched teeth. So again. And again. Until arms became meat. Until bones begged to be forgotten. They called it interrogation. They called it truth. But truth had long since left the room. Only cruelty remained. Methodical, practiced, patient. They poured vinegar into the wounds. Not for healing, for waking. She passed out. They waited, then woke her, then dropped her. One torturer said, "She'll talk." The other shrugged. She won't walk. At dawn, she was untied, dropped in a corner like waste. Alive, sort of. The next girl came in, blindfolded, barefoot, wrists tied like wings, and the rope creaked overhead, asking for its next prayer. They called it a pear, shaped like fruit, shiny, smooth, deceptive, but it did not nourish. It bloomed, yes, but only in flesh. A handle, a hinge, petals of iron curled inward, inserted, twisted, spread. It was never meant to kill, just to break, to silence, to shame. It bloomed in mouths, teeth cracking like dry seeds, tongues split like ripe figs, throats torn from the inside out. It bloomed in wombs, in silence, where screams collapsed into sobs, where no prayer dared reach. Wives, daughters, midwives, accused witches. They opened them all, not with keys, with questions. Did you lie? Did you tempt? Did you dance with the moon? Twist. Did you curse the harvest? Did you whisper to the devil? Twist. Sometimes it stopped there, sometimes not. They made a version for the rectum, another for the throat, one for men, one for children. The metal flower was versatile. Anatomy was no obstacle, only opportunity. And when it finished blooming, it closed again, quiet, clean, ready for the next blossom. The blood was wiped. The screams were not. It was placed back in its case, on a shelf, beside the holy texts, beside the other tools. It had no thorns, just memory, memory that never healed. A priest once said it resembled the Virgin's tears. A guard called it the blossom of confession. The girl who endured it called it nothing. She never spoke again, and in some forgotten corner of a forgotten chamber, the iron flower waits, closed, cold, patient, an iron muzzle, forged not to protect, but to humiliate, to mangle, to erase. It did not cover the face. It devoured it. A cage of metal, fixed with a bit, and inside, spikes, turned inward, always inward. It clamped the mouth, forced teeth apart, pinned the tongue like a pinned insect. Every word she spoke shredded her. Every breath came salted with blood. She could weep, but not whisper. She could sob, but not scream. They paraded her, through muddy streets, through markets, through squares. A sign around her neck. Scold. Whore. Liar. Children pointed. Dogs barked. Men laughed. Women looked away. But she walked, mouth full of rust and ruin, eyes full of something worse. They called it silence. She called it survival. Some bled out. Some choked. Some learned to hold their tongues. Forever. The mask did not punish the crime. It punished the noise. It punished the refusal to stay small. It punished the echo, worn for hours, days, sometimes longer. The iron grew hot in sun, cold as betrayal in frost. It left marks, scars behind the ears, calluses on the jaw, broken teeth, split lips, a mouth that never healed right, but deeper than flesh. It left shame, internal, inescapable, inherited. Some say you can still hear them, the ones who wore the mask, their voices trapped in iron, pressed into silence, burned into memory. No name remains, just the sound of breathing. Torn, wet, heavy, and in a museum now, behind clean glass, the mask sits, open, waiting. It looks small, almost delicate, like something that could never hurt you, until it does. Naked, chained, marched through the village square. Not a punishment, a performance. Flesh on display, back welted with fresh lashes, ankles bruised by rusted iron, mouth dry with dread. Children threw rot, peels, stones, a dead rat. Laughter followed like flies. Men jeered, grinning with crooked teeth, fists clenched around bottles or belts. Women turned away, not from pity, but fear. Fear the fire might follow their glance. Fear their gaze would be seen as kinship. She was paraded for them, to teach, to warn, to whisper, this could be you. The path was planned. Market first, the busiest, then past the church, to remind God who still held the whip, then the well, because even water had to learn what defiance cost. She tripped once, Knees struck stone. The crowd howled. A man spit on her back. Another offered coin. Not for mercy, but to lift her chin, see her face. The chain jerked her onward. No one spoke her name. It had been taken, scraped off like bark, left to rot in the square with the rest of her. Some said she was a thief, others a witch, some merely disobedient. The truth didn't matter, only the message. Look at what happens. Look at what we can do. She bled from the ankles, from between the legs, from the silence. The shame was never hers, but it wore her face. It echoed with each footstep. It lingered on the stones long after the chains had been removed. Even now, the square remembers. It always does. They didn't want truth. They wanted a shape, a script, a myth with fingernails. They already had the ending. They only needed her mouth to say it, so they made her say it, over and over, until the tongue stopped fighting and the teeth broke clean. The room smelled of soot, sweat, and scorched hair. Names, Sabbaths, pacts written in nightshade and ink that never existed. Lies, spoken through bloodied lips, through screams stitched together with salt. First came the questions, then the tightening, then the heat. Red iron made to whisper truth from the bones. Who else danced with the devil? What did you feed the beast? When did you give your soul? She said what they wanted, not because it was true, because they would keep asking until she did. So she gave them a sister, a neighbor, a name carved from memory and handed over like ash. Her words were firewood, thrown into the sermon's blaze. Each word burned a little of her away. But it wasn't just for the crowd. The priest needed her confession. The scribe needed his ink. The judge needed silence. They weren't after evil. They were after order, and her truth didn't fit. So they melted her into something else, something useful, a warning with breasts and scorched skin. When she fainted, they woke her with smoke. When she cried, they called it cleansing. She forgot what was real. She forgot her name. But she remembered the heat, and how they smiled when she screamed. It was never about guilt. It was about spectacle, about bending flesh until it formed a shape they could parade, a confession forged in fire, a story they could believe in, a truth they could own. They stripped her, shaved her, every strand of hair, gone, eyebrows, pubic, crown, no place left for the devil to hide. She stood, skin bare, soul bruised, under the eyes of men who claimed righteousness, but stared with hunger. They called it examination. She called it exposure. They turned her like meat, hands prodding, eyes squinting, voices murmuring with each scar, each mole, each imagined sign. They were looking for a mark, a door, a stain that whispered, witch, a mole behind the knee, a birthmark on the hip, a freckle on her thigh. Each one became a story, and then the pin, thin, sharp, sanctified by spit and suspicion. They stabbed the skin, waited. If it bled, she lived. If it didn't, proof. The devil had kissed her there, sealed his pact with a numb patch of flesh. And when it bled, they stabbed again and again, until one did not. They cheered, called it a sign, marked and chosen, not by God, but by the enemy. She wept. They said tears were salt from the soul, evidence of guilt trying to wash itself clean. She was catalogued, her body turned into parchment, inkless notes made in mutters and nods. No written record, only memory, and that was more dangerous than paper. By the end, she no longer flinched, not because she was brave, because she knew it wouldn't matter. They weren't looking for answers, they were hunting confirmation. And every woman has a mark, if you pierce her long enough. A trial without questions, no need for truth, only theater. The judge didn't speak. He nodded, eyes fixed not on the woman, but on the man in robes beside him. The priest with his thumb pressed into a worn crucifix, like wringing sin from wood. The room was silent, except for the scratch of the scribe's quill, and the occasional cough of dust from old wood. She stood in chains, not iron. Worse, expectation, because everyone already knew. The villagers had gathered, not to witness justice, but to see it confirmed, to hear their fears made holy, to know that the devil had been among them, and that someone else would burn for it. The priest recited scripture, not to comfort, but to sharpen. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. The verdict was not read. It was nodded, then echoed by murmurs as if the devil himself was being sentenced, and not a girl who once healed a dying lamb with herbs. The fire had already been arranged, logs stacked like bones, pitch ready to weep flame. Even before the trial began, smoke curled from the corners of the courtyard, not from burning, from certainty. She was not condemned in that room. She had been condemned in the whispers, in the glances, in the absence of doubt. No one looked at her, not even the priest now. Only the boy in the crowd, her brother. Eyes wide, fists clenched, as if silence could still rewind time. She was led away, not dragged, escorted, as if this were ceremony, not slaughter, and beneath the shadow of the cross, another body was offered. Not for salvation, but to satisfy fear, disguised as faith. No prayer, no blanket, no mercy, just straw, damp. It scratched her skin like thorns made of memory. A single candle guttered by the doorway, spitting shadows onto stone. The cell held its breath. So did she. Outside, the night pretended to sleep, but the air carried sounds. Wood being stacked, a voice muttering scripture, laughter where it didn't belong. She turned her face away from the wall, toward nothing, eyes open. Blinking felt like closing. No one came. Not to offer comfort, not to confess guilt. Only the rats, soft-footed, too used to death, to be afraid of dying. The scent of ash was already there, in her hair, in her mouth, like the fire had reached backward in time to mark her early. She whispered to herself, not spells, not curses, just names, her mother's, her brother's, the boy who once gave her a carved bird, before fear taught him to forget her. Sometimes the guard knocked once on the bars, not to check, just to remind her he was still there, and she was still not. The hours did not pass. They hovered, thick as stone, heavy as guilt that didn't belong to her. She tried to pray, but the words were gone, or maybe they had never been hers. So she hummed, a tune from childhood, a lullaby about rain. And for a moment, a single breath. It felt like the world paused, then footsteps, then metal, then morning. And the last thing she saw was the square bathed in red light from a sun that looked too bright for what it was about to witness. The crowd gathered, not in silence, never in silence. They came hungry, for spectacle, for salvation, for someone else's pain. Children sat on shoulders, bread passed between hands. Someone sold wine, another carved a charm into a stick of ash. The wood was stacked high, split clean, arranged like a promise, a stage, a warning, a ritual older than most hymns. The priest arrived first. He did not look at her, only at the flame, as if it might grant him something God never would. When they brought her out, the crowd leaned forward, not to pray, but to see her eyes. But she was already gone. Her body moved. Her breath still fogged the morning. But the rest, the soft parts, the singing parts, had left hours ago. They did not burn her. They finished what they had already begun. The real fire was before the flames. The hands that struck her, the words that carved holes into her silence, the nights that pulled her apart thread by thread. She did not scream, because there was no one left to scream for, no God that would bend, no man who would listen. The rope held her still. The wind caught her hair like it missed her. And the torch did not hesitate. The flames rose slow, licked her feet like a child asking for forgiveness. She did not flinch, because by then, the fire was the kindest part. It did not judge, did not curse, it only took. And for once, something in this world kept its promise. The fire died, the ashes cooled, the smoke curled upward, whispering secrets to the indifferent sky. But the fear, it did not fade. Not in the streets, not in the eyes of those who watched. They called it justice, a cleansing, a saving. But deep in their bones, beneath the masks of faith and law, they knew the truth. They weren't afraid of witches. No, They feared something far older, far quieter, far more dangerous. They feared women who didn't break, women whose backs bent but never bowed, women who screamed and did not beg for mercy, women who met their chains with silence sharp as knives. The stories did not end with flame. They lingered like smoke on the wind, carried into homes, into whispers behind closed doors. Mothers warned daughters, "Be careful where you step." Sisters watched each other's shadows. Neighbors turned eyes away, not to forget, but to remember. What happens when a woman claims her voice? The ashes scattered, but the fire kept burning, in memory, in fear, in rebellion. The village learned its lesson, not from the flames, but from what the flames could not touch. Because fear is not a flame you can snuff out. It is a wind that carries the smoke of every woman, whoever dared to stand. And that smoke, that silent, haunting smoke, remains, always.